John chapter 6. And I want us to look at something really special in this story. We're going to unpack it and see Jesus do something extraordinary with something very ordinary. But that is going to lead us to something that every single one of us can apply to our lives. Because if you're being honest, sometimes you come to church and you hear a pastor say something and you think, I don't know that can apply to me right now where I'm at in life. Well, this one will apply to everyone no matter where you are in life. I can guarantee you that. So listen as we take off in verse 1. We'll have it for everyone. It says this: After this, Jesus crossed over to the far side of the Sea of Galilee, also known as the Sea of Tiberias. A huge crowd kept following him wherever he went. This seems to be a theme with Jesus, and I'll be honest with you, if one of you started turning water into wine and healing people be following you around too. I mean, that's just, come on, man. If you're going to show up at a wedding and boom, pop H2O into Merlot, people are going to start following you around a lot, right? And it says the huge crowd kept following him wherever he went because they saw his miraculous signs as he healed the sick. Then Jesus climbed a hill and sat down with his disciples around him. It was nearly time for the Jewish Passover celebration. And Jesus soon saw that this huge crowd of people were coming to look for him. And so he turned to Philip and he asked, "Where can we buy bread to feed all these people?" He was testing Philip, for he already knew what he was going to do. John's gospel is all about pointing to the truth that Jesus is God. So John was explicit when he puts that in. Of course, he knew what he was going to do. John's just reiterating. Not only was Jesus about to perform a miraculous sign, but that sign pointed to the fact that he was God. And so Philip replied, well, even if we worked for months, we wouldn't have enough money to feed them. Really, if you look in its original language there, Philip's talking about maybe 6, 7, 8 months of somebody's salary to feed everyone in attendance. Can you imagine that? I mean, can you imagine being in that predicament, right? You've put a thing together, a lot of people showed up, then a lot more people showed up, then a whole lot more people showed up. Everybody's hungry, and somebody comes to you and is like, man, we got to feed all these people. What are you going to do? He's like, I don't know. How much money you got? I don't know. How much money you got? Yeah, how much can we get Venmo'd? I don't know, like 30, 40 bucks? You're like, I'm going to need about 35,000. Is there anybody? Nope. Anybody got that on them? No. Can you Venmo me? No. You don't even know how to, that doesn't fit even on your phone. You can't even get it to me. Okay, great. Like, you'd be freaking out. You imagine, like, that's so astounding that the fact that Jesus would look at Philip and say, hey, where are we going to buy bread for all these people? He knew Philip's response was going to be like, that's like half a year of my salary. So I'm all in, but I'm going to have to write you a check. And you're going to need to wait about 6 months for it to clear before it gets in there, right? Like it was one of those things. But Jesus was asking Philip, in case you didn't know this, Jesus was asking Philip because Philip was actually from the area. And so it's like if you visit a new town, if you fly into a new city, one of the first things you do when you touch down or maybe you meet with a friend or a family member there is a lot of times you ask, hey, so where's a good place to go eat? Hey, where's a good place to go catch a concert or whatever? Like you kind of ask those questions. And so Jesus looks at Philip and he's like, you're from the area. Hey, where's the best barbecue in town? You know what I mean? It was kind of one of those, where's the best bakery? Man, where can we get this? But Jesus knew what he was going to do. And so Philip says, oh, man, we don't have enough money. And then, this is my favorite part. Then Andrew, Peter's brother, spoke up. There's a young boy here with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what good is that to feed such a huge crowd? Jesus said, tell everyone to sit down. So they all sat down on the grassy slopes. The men alone numbered about 5,000. And then Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks to God, and distributed them to the people. And afterward, he did the same with the fish. And they all ate as much as they wanted. And after everyone was full, Jesus told his disciples, now gather up all the leftovers. We don't want anything to be wasted. So they picked up the pieces and they filled 12 baskets with scraps left by the people who had eaten from the 5 barley loaves. Can you imagine being in that situation? And Jesus is like, all right, I mean, it's literally Andrew's like, so this kid has, I don't know, he's got a Long John Silver's kids meal that he brought with him. I don't know, that's probably not gonna cut it. But hey, here's what he's got. And Jesus is like, great, let me see it. Okay, crunchies. Okay, Lord, thank you. He just pops the top on it. He's like, here's some fish for you. Here's a hush puppy for you. Here's some fish for you. Here's 2 hush puppies for you. You're a growing boy. And you're just kind of watching, and all of a sudden it's just like, how many fish are you going to pull out of that little box? And he's like, oh, here's a toy. Sure, you can have that too. You can have the toy. Here's the juice box for you. And then all of a sudden it's like 18,000 other juice boxes. And like, what is it? How's he? It's like a magician. It's just, you know what I mean? You've seen those videos where the magician like opens his trunk on the thing. He's like, puts his whole arm, you know, it's just really crazy. I can just imagine he's just kind of like, okay, here we go. There you go. There you go. There you go. You imagine being one of the disciples? We don't think about this. We read these stories and they seem so far away from us. But no, come on now, be with me. Think about being there and watching Jesus take this little sack lunch from a poor kid's lunch. And he comes up and he's like, here you go. And he just keeps boom, boom, boom. Boom. I mean, it's like a chef sitting, running, table 2, out, table 3, out, table 4, out, just boom, boom, boom. And people just running food. They keep coming back. Where is it coming from? I don't know. Just take it. People, they're getting excited. Okay, yeah, okay. And I bet it was so crazy because you've got like 10,000 plus people eating and they're just running food. I wonder if it was just like, what just happened? And then they get to the end of it and he's like, wow. I wonder if one of them just said, what's he doing? You can just imagine, like, I mean, there's probably Peter just being like, how'd you do that? Peter was so loud, right? He was like, well, how'd you do that? Peter, take them the fish, Peter. Take them the fish. Everybody else is like, we're carrying a lot more fish than Peter. He's like, no, but did you see that? He's like, yeah, we all saw it, Peter. We're hanging out. We're handing out the food. You started handing out food. He's like, no, but did you see that? And they're like, yes. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, that's insane. We think about it because it's just this fun Bible story. But understand what I'm about to tell you. Walk into a stadium full of people, 10,000 strong, with your own thing of nachos, and try to feed everybody. Now you're like, oh, that ain't happening. Exactly. That's crazy. And again, remember, Jesus, he'd already turned water into wine. He healed a lame man. He healed a nobleman's son who was on his deathbed of sickness from 20 miles away. I mean, the man came to see him and said, my son is sick. I need to heal my son. Go, your son will be fine. And he's like, got it. Boom. Shows up. Boom. Son is fine. I mean, this stuff, he started saying some stuff. Rewind. John 3:16, very popular verse. That was before this. He's telling people, look, God so loved the world that he gave me, this guy here, God in a bod. Here you go. He's saying some stuff. Crowds were following him. They were enamored at already what he was doing. So count this coming. And it's like, I imagine it would be one of those miracles that as it's happening in the moment, you don't appreciate what you're seeing until it's over. You ever had one of those kind of situations? That happens a lot, especially in sports, right? There's maybe a once-in-a-generation athlete who will come along and people will watch them and like, we did not appreciate what we saw until, and you start to kind of, you kind of get that vibe. I wonder if this is one of those miracles because it was so moving. I mean, you had so many people who were involved and the dissemination of all this food that it was just one of those, then everybody steps back and he's like, okay, now collect the scraps. I wonder if it was like after they collected the scraps, they're like, hey, we got 12 baskets. What did we start with? Well, we started with 5 barley loaves and 2 little fish. And I want you to understand something about the fish. This wasn't a salmon fillet. Nobody cedar planked this thing and squeezed lemon on top of it. It was like, here you go. Here's a little garnish. No. This was like overgrown sardines. This was stuff that you eat when you're on a youth trip and you get dared to eat. You know what I mean? It's that kind of stuff. Hey, we're going to play a gross, disgusting food eating game. Great. Break out those types of fish, right? This was a poor kid's lunch. And that's not a slight on the boy, But this was a poor kid's lunch. This wasn't like he showed up with fresh baked bread. This wasn't like he showed up with deer meat or venison steaks or anything like that. This kid showed up with a little bit of fish and barley loaves. This was meager. You know what it was? This was insignificant in the eyes of most people. But again, God does a lot with our little. I think of this boy's lunch, and it reminds me when I was growing up, my family didn't have much, but we didn't know we didn't have much. And I feel like that's the best kind of poor to be. That is the best kind of poor. My parents still made life incredible for us, but we ate fried bologna sandwiches. Some of you are like, I didn't even know that was a thing. Good for you that you didn't know that was a thing. And when I say fried bologna sandwiches, I literally mean pull out the frying pan, take out the off-brand bologna that you just bought from the grocery store that probably had expired 2 or 3 days prior because it's cheaper when you get it on the way out. There are actual grocery stores like that. They're like day past or day of expiration date grocery stores. That's where we would shop sometimes. And so we would get this fried bologna. You literally just pull out bologna. And I'm not going to go into what bologna's made of. Don't care. Don't need to know. Don't want to know. Don't tell me afterwards. I don't want to know. Don't email me. Don't let me know. Don't even bring it up. I'm just going to talk about it now, and we're going to move on from it, okay? Bologna, out the thing. It's slimy. Stuff drips off of it. You know it's dripping. You know it's dripping, and you just don't ask. Just don't ask. It dripped. It got on your leg. You didn't care. It would drip on the floor. Dog would lick it up. Even the dog would lick it up, look at you, and be like, mm-mm. Put it on a frying pan. Psh, sizzle up. You know what you do? Here's a piece of bread. Squirt some mustard on that. Spread it around. Fried bologna. Boom. There you go, kids. Happy dinner. Like, we didn't know any better, right? That's basically what I picture is this kid showing up being like, well, I got a fried bologna sandwich. And people are like, I'd rather just not eat, you know? Like, oh, goodness. You know what I'm saying? God does a lot with our little. But here's where I want us to go this week. Because where we're going this week is we're going to look at who I consider, again, aside from Jesus, the pivotal person in the story. And it's Andrew. I want to circle back to verse 8 when it says this. Then Andrew, Peter's brother, spoke up and said, there's a young boy here with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. You could read this passage 100 times and glaze over that as easy as anyone. But I want you to know something about Andrew. He was one of those dozen guys who Jesus plucked and said, do you want to go fish for people? And Andrew was like, sign me up. I'll get my pole. Let's go. Right? Andrew was all about it. But did you know that Andrew is mentioned several times in the Gospels? Catch it. Always bringing people to Jesus. Do you know this about Andrew? Here's what he did. Do you know this? Andrew is the one who introduced his brother Peter to Jesus. Now everybody knows Peter. Of course everybody knows Peter. Of course everybody would remember the disciple who cut the guy's ear off. I mean, it's like, duh. You think of others, I'm like, hey, can you name disciples? You're like, yeah, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. I'm like, great. You got any others who didn't write a biography about Jesus? You're like, Constantinople? Nope. Charlemagne? Nope. You're just naming history characters at this point. That's not at all anything. You're like, oh, Peter. Yeah. Well, everybody knows Peter. Cut the guy's ear off? Yep. That's what you know. Because Peter was so brash. His personality was so rough around the edges. I mean, he was so just blue-collar fisherman. I mean, literally, here's a guy who's walking around with Jesus. He's like, hey, Jesus, who you like more, me or this guy? And it's like, oh, you shouldn't be saying. Like, Peter is that person who you can imagine being in social situations with, and you're thinking, I don't know what is going to come out of his mouth. You know, like, we all have that person in our lives who, when we call them and we're around other people, we cannot put it on speakerphone. Because you're just like, I'm not terribly sure what they're going to say. if it's on speakerphone. Like I can remember who that person was in my life. I still have that person in my life, and every time I call, I'm not doing that. Like I can't call him in my car. My kids cannot hear what is potentially going to come out of your mouth. Just even in the greeting, right? Like Peter was that guy. He denied Jesus 3 times. I mean, this is a guy you can't. Of course, you cannot forget Peter. Peter's sitting there getting in fights with people, literally cut a man's ear off. You don't do that. Nobody does that in social situations. Like most people just send a mean tweet to somebody, and Peter's just cutting an ear off, right? Like, or at least so other people just give like a childish comment back. You're like, oh, your face, it's like, oh, thanks, you burn, right? No, Peter was just like, I don't play around with any of that. Sticks and stones, whatever. I'm cutting somebody's ear off. It's on. And then not soon after that, I mean, not too far after that, they roll up on Peter and like, weren't you that guy who was hanging out with Jesus? He's like, nah, I don't. What are you talking about? Jesus? Sounds familiar, but they're like, no, it was you. We saw you with him. He's like, Jess, I'm trying. I don't think that was me, though. I mean, I've been told I look like other people, though. I've been told I got a familiar face. They're like, we're pretty sure because you cut the guy's ear off. That was you. We would remember. Because that's not normal. No one does that. We remember your face. Loud guy, always with Jesus. He's like, no, you're dead wrong. Get away from me. Right? Like, we know that story. But you know that Peter was also referred to as, quote, the rock upon which Jesus would build his church. Peter is one of the many who we can point to and say, wow, the work and the sacrifice as he followed Jesus grew this expansive kingdom of God here on earth through the declaration and sharing of the gospel. But did you know that Peter would never have even met Jesus if it weren't for Andrew? His brother said, hey, come meet this Jesus guy. He's about to change our lives. Andrew was always introducing people to Jesus. Even later on in John, when Jesus is making what we would call his triumphant entry into the city. It was this Passover celebration where basically the Jewish community would celebrate their exodus from Egypt. So you remember that story, right? 10 Commandments. We've seen the movie. VeggieTales did a thing about it, right? Pharaoh, let my people go. Moses, the whole deal. Wilderness, boom. Burning bush. Lots of stories there, lots of stuff. Well, the Jewish community would celebrate that exodus, their kind of their freedom, getting out of Egypt in this what we would call Passover celebration. And in this particular one that all of these men would attend and partake in, there were a few Greek individuals who had showed up, which was not common. Because unlike today, thousands of years ago, the Passover celebration was essentially a kind of a Jewish community-only type of celebration because of what it memorialized. It was celebrating their exodus from Egypt. So Greek people at the time, it just wouldn't have meant anything to them. It just would have been, it just would not have translated. The significance wouldn't have translated. It's much like me trying to get my kids to watch the movie The Little Giants, where it means a lot to me and it takes me back and gives me all the childhood feels. My kids just look at it and think, that's lame. Like they just wouldn't have been a part of it. But there were some Greek folks who had come to this Passover celebration and wanted to meet Jesus. And Andrew found them and said, let me bring you and I'll introduce you to him. He was always introducing people to Jesus. Even these Greek individuals who were in a place where they felt out of place. Has that ever been you? You ever gone somewhere and maybe you felt like, oh, I don't know that I fit in here. I don't know that I belong here. I remember I was 13 years old and we went to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina on vacation. And me and my brother and my parents drove down in my mom's van. We get down there and we get settled into our hotel and we go out to dinner and we're driving around and we're looking and we're thinking, why do so many people have motorcycles down here? I mean, everybody who would drive by us, just motorcycle. I mean, there had to be thousands of motorcyclists in Myrtle Beach. And finally, I mean, we'd pull up to a stop sign and there's my dad driving our old hoopty van. And there's just motorcyclists on the other side, and they're just kind of like, "What's up?" And he's like, "Yeah, man, hardcore. Sweet van, bro. Sweet van. Let me rev my Harley and skedaddle," right? And I remember we ended up having a conversation with some guys at the restaurant. We're like, "Hey, why are all these motorcycles here?" And they go, "Oh, it's biker week." And we're like, "Yep, figures." Our family brought a minivan to biker week. We felt a little bit out of place, right? And I can imagine these Greek individuals felt incredibly out of place and maybe a little bit kind of out of the loop, and almost maybe, in a celebration like that, everybody's so focused on what's going on that maybe they wouldn't have been given a ton of attention. And maybe they felt almost like outsiders. And what does Andrew do? He introduces them to Jesus. And then he does the same thing with the boy and the fish. They didn't have enough money to buy food. They had all these hurdles. They had all these questions, all these people. And Andrew finds the boy with food and brings him to Jesus. We should never underestimate. I want you to hear this. I want you to hear this because this is for everybody. We should never underestimate the impact potential of a little invitation. Because that little invitation can have giant implications in the life of another person. Do you know why? God has always been able to take what seems like a little to us and do a lot with it through us. God takes our small and makes it significant as he challenges us and comforts us with the truth, with this reminder that he is able. We are in charge of the efforts, but God is in charge of the results. And that is so freeing, I think, for so many of us, because we think we have to do extraordinary things on our own. But in the reality is, man, what if you just introduce someone to Jesus? What if our role is making an introduction by the way we live our lives? What if our role is making an introduction by the way we love people, by the way we listen to people, by the way we see people, so it's the way we treat people, by the way we love people who think differently than we do, by the way we treat people who think differently than we do, digitally or in person? What if that introduction to Jesus is made because of the forgiveness we extend when someone wrongs us and they see Jesus through us? What if that extension, what if that introduction to Jesus flows out of a lifestyle that we live that says, yeah, I'm just not going to make my life all about me. I'm going to be a servant. And as we sparkle through our service, people look at us and say, what's different about you? Oh, well, let me make this introduction. It's Jesus. Never underestimate what God can do with a little invitation.